Before anything else, take a moment and notice how often you speak to yourself in a single day, not out loud, but internally, in the quiet pauses, in moments of doubt, in the split second after something goes wrong. That inner voice is constant, and over time, it becomes the lens through which you see yourself, your relationships, and the world. Most people focus on changing their circumstances, their relationships, or other people without ever questioning the messages they repeat inside their own mind. Yet those messages quietly shape what you tolerate, what you fear, and what you believe you deserve. They influence how much you explain yourself, how much you give, and how often you walk away from your own needs to keep the peace. The truth is, life will not slow down to protect your self respect. People will project, demand, disappoint, and misunderstand you. If you do not have a strong internal dialogue, you will absorb all of it. You will start negotiating your worth, silencing your instincts, and calling self abandonment maturity. This speech is not about positive thinking or empty affirmations. It is about psychological grounding. It is about the things you need to remind yourself of every single day so you do not lose yourself in the noise, pressure, and emotional expectations around you. Because the most important relationship you will ever have is the one you have with yourself. And what you tell yourself daily determines whether that relationship is stable or fragile. When you tell yourself that your worth is not up for negotiation, you are making a psychological correction to years of subtle conditioning. Many people grow up learning that love, safety, or approval must be earned through performance. Be useful, be agreeable, be impressive. Over time, this creates an internal marketplace where your value rises and falls based on how well you meet other people's expectations. This belief quietly trains you to tolerate disrespect, overextend yourself, and accept less than you deserve because somewhere inside you are still trying to prove that you are enough. Daily self talk that reinforces non negotiable worth interrupts this pattern. It reminds you that your value is inherent, not transactional. You do not become more worthy because someone chooses you, praises you, or validates you. And you do not become less worthy when someone withdraws, criticizes, or misunderstands you. When you forget this, you may find yourself explaining your needs excessively, staying too long in unhealthy dynamics, or adjusting your personality to keep the peace. None of that creates connection. It creates self-abandonment. This reminder is especially important in relationships where power is uneven. People who are controlling, emotionally immature, or self-focused often test how much someone is willing to compromise their self-respect to maintain closeness. If your worth feels negotiable, you may respond to these tests by trying harder, giving more, or becoming smaller. If your worth is stable, you recognize these behaviors as information rather than instructions. You notice them without internalizing them. Telling yourself this every day also changes how you respond to rejection. Instead of interpreting rejection as proof of inadequacy, you begin to see it as a mismatch, a limit, or a choice that belongs to the other person. This shift reduces shame and self-blame. You stop chasing closure from people who cannot offer it and stop arguing with someone else's perception of you. Non-negotiable worth does not mean arrogance or entitlement. It means grounding. You can still reflect, grow, apologize, and improve without collapsing into self-doubt. You can take responsibility for mistakes without defining yourself by them. When your worth is stable, feedback becomes data rather than a verdict. Over time, this daily statement builds internal authority. You become less reactive to praise and criticism because neither determines who you are. You begin making decisions based on alignment rather than fear of losing approval. You speak more honestly, tolerate discomfort more effectively, and recognize when something costs you too much internally. When worth is no longer something you barter for, you stop participating in dynamics that require you to diminish yourself to stay connected, and that internal shift subtly changes how others relate to you as well. When you tell yourself that you are allowed to have boundaries without guilt, you are undoing a deeply ingrained belief that your needs are inconveniences. Many people were taught, directly or indirectly, that being easygoing, accommodating, and self sacrificing was the price of being loved. As a result, boundaries can feel unnatural or even dangerous, triggering anxiety, fear of rejection, or shame. Guilt often shows up not because you are doing something wrong, but because you are doing something unfamiliar to your nervous system. Daily reinforcement of this idea helps you separate discomfort from wrongdoing. Boundaries often create emotional friction, especially with people who benefited from your lack of limits. Their disappointment, frustration, or anger can easily be misinterpreted as evidence that you are being selfish or unkind. In reality, those reactions are often signs that the boundary is necessary. When you remind yourself that guilt is not a moral compass, you gain the ability to pause instead of immediately backtracking or over explaining. This internal permission also changes how you relate to your own energy. Without boundaries, exhaustion becomes normalized. You say yes when you are already depleted, stay available when you need rest, and prioritize harmony over health. Over time, this leads to resentment, emotional numbness, or burnout. Boundaries protect your capacity to show up authentically rather than performatively. They allow you to give from choice rather than obligation. Guilt-free boundaries are not rigid walls meant to punish others. They are guidelines that help relationships function sustainably. When you hold them consistently, you reduce confusion and mixed signals. People learn what to expect from you, and that clarity can actually increase respect even if it initially creates tension. The people who are capable of healthy relationships will adjust. Those who cannot may push, minimize, or guilt trip, revealing important information about their emotional maturity. Reminding yourself of this daily also helps dismantle people-pleasing patterns. People-pleasing is often driven by the fear that asserting yourself will lead to abandonment or conflict you cannot survive. Each time you maintain a boundary despite guilt, you provide evidence to yourself that you can tolerate discomfort and remain safe. This builds self-trust and emotional resilience. You begin to experience yourself as someone who can protect their own well-being without constant external reassurance. Over time, guilt loses its grip. It may still arise, but it no longer dictates your behavior. You recognize it as a conditioned response rather than a directive. You stop negotiating your limits in moments of pressure and start responding from clarity. Boundaries become less about defending yourself and more about honoring your internal signals. When you allow yourself boundaries without guilt, you reclaim agency over your time, emotions, and relationships, and that quiet consistency reshapes how you show up in the world and how the world learns to treat you. When you tell yourself that not everyone deserves access to you, you are redefining closeness as something intentional rather than automatic. Many people confuse availability with kindness and accessibility with love. They feel obligated to respond, explain, engage, and accommodate simply because someone shows interest or demands connection. Over time, this creates emotional overcrowding where too many people have influence over your thoughts, time, and nervous system. Daily self reminders help you slow this process down and recognize that access is not a right, it is a privilege built through behavior. Access means more than physical presence or conversation. It includes emotional availability, personal information, vulnerability, and influence over your decisions. When you give this freely without discernment, you may find yourself affected by people who are inconsistent, dismissive, or emotionally unsafe. You start carrying other people's moods, expectations, and chaos, often without realizing it. Telling yourself that access must be earned helps you pause and observe rather than immediately engage. You shift from reacting to choosing. This mindset is especially important if you have a history of overgiving or people pleasing. In those patterns, saying no or pulling back can feel cruel or selfish. In reality, discernment is not rejection, it is assessment. You are allowed to notice how someone treats you over time, how they respond to your boundaries, and whether their presence adds stability or stress. Consistency, accountability, and respect are not too much to ask for. They are the baseline for safe access. Reminding yourself of this daily also reduces the urge to overshare. Oversharing is often mistaken for intimacy, but true closeness develops gradually and reciprocally. When you offer deep access too quickly, especially to people who have not demonstrated emotional capacity, you risk feeling exposed, misunderstood, or used. Protecting access allows intimacy to grow organically rather than being forced by urgency or loneliness. This belief also changes how you respond to entitlement. Some people assume they deserve your time, attention, or emotional labor simply because they are familiar, persistent, or loud. When you internalize that access is selective, you stop engaging out of pressure. You no longer feel the need to explain why you are unavailable or justify your distance. You recognize entitlement as information about the other person rather than an obligation for you. Over time, this daily reminder strengthens self respect. You begin to notice who listens, who dismisses, who repairs, and who repeats harmful patterns. You invest your energy where it is valued rather than drained. This does not make you cold or closed off, it makes you intentional. When access is given thoughtfully, relationships feel steadier and safer. You stop trying to be available to everyone and start being present with those who have shown they can handle that closeness responsibly. When you tell yourself that you do not need to explain your no, you are challenging a deeply learned survival behavior. Many people grow up believing that refusal must be softened, justified, or defended in order to be acceptable. As a result, saying no often triggers anxiety, followed by long explanations meant to manage the other person's reaction. This habit is not about clarity, it is about safety. Over-explaining becomes a way to reduce conflict, avoid guilt, and keep connection intact, even at the cost of your own comfort. Daily reminders that no is a complete sentence help separate choice from justification. You are allowed to make decisions based on your capacity, values, and limits without presenting a persuasive argument. When you feel compelled to explain, it is often because you fear being misunderstood, judged, or punished for asserting yourself. Recognizing this allows you to pause and ask whether the explanation is truly necessary or simply a reflexive attempt to secure approval. This shift is especially important in dynamics where control or entitlement is present. People who struggle with boundaries may treat explanations as openings rather than information. The more you explain, the more they debate, negotiate, or invalidate your reasoning. In these situations, over explaining does not lead to understanding, it leads to erosion of your limit. When you remind yourself that your no does not require validation, you close the door to unnecessary power struggles. Letting go of explanations also strengthens your internal authority. Each time you say no without defending it, you reinforce the belief that your decisions are legitimate simply because they are yours. This reduces self-doubt and the urge to second-guess yourself. You begin to trust your judgment instead of outsourcing it to other people's reactions. Over time, this creates a calmer, more grounded sense of self. This does not mean you never explain. There is a difference between choosing to explain and feeling forced to. In healthy relationships, explanations can be offered freely without fear or pressure. The key distinction is whether the explanation is a gift or a shield. When it comes from choice, it supports connection. When it comes from fear, it reinforces self-abandonment. Daily reinforcement of this idea also reduces emotional exhaustion. Over-explaining requires mental energy, emotional labor, and vigilance. You anticipate objections, craft responses, and manage outcomes. When you stop doing this, interactions become simpler and clearer. You say what you mean and allow others to manage their own feelings about it. Over time, people adjust. Those who respect you accept your no without interrogation. Those who do not may reveal themselves through pushback or guilt tactics. That information is valuable. By reminding yourself that you do not need to explain your no, you reclaim your right to make choices without permission, and you begin relating from self-respect rather than self-defense. When you tell yourself that you can tolerate disappointment without abandoning yourself, you are confronting one of the most difficult emotional skills to develop. Many people learn early on that disappointing others leads to withdrawal of love, anger, or rejection. As a result, they become highly attuned to other people's expectations and deeply uncomfortable with letting anyone down. This often turns into a pattern where your own needs are routinely sidelined to preserve harmony. Over time, this creates an internal split where you stay connected to others by disconnecting from yourself. Daily reminders that disappointment is survivable help reframe this fear. Disappointment is an emotional experience, not a catastrophe. When you allow someone to feel disappointed without rushing to fix it, you are respecting both their autonomy and your own limits. You are acknowledging that adults are capable of managing their feelings without you absorbing or resolving them. This shift reduces the sense of urgency that drives people pleasing and emotional overextension. This belief also changes how you interpret emotional reactions from others. When someone expresses hurt or frustration, it can trigger immediate self-blame and the impulse to reverse your decision. You may assume you have caused harm simply by choosing differently. Reminding yourself that disappointment does not equal damage allows you to stay grounded. You can listen, empathize, and remain present without sacrificing your boundary or your truth. Learning to tolerate disappointment also builds emotional resilience. Each time you hold your ground despite discomfort, you prove to yourself that you can survive tension and remain intact. This counters the fear that conflict will destroy relationships or leave you isolated. In reality, relationships that depend on your self-abandonment are already fragile. Healthy connections can withstand disappointment because they are not built on compliance. This daily statement is especially powerful for people who equate being good with being agreeable. It challenges the belief that your worth is tied to how little inconvenience you cause. You begin to recognize that disappointing someone does not erase your kindness, empathy or value. It simply reflects differing needs or expectations. When you stop trying to eliminate disappointment at all costs, you create space for more honest interactions. Over time, this practice also reduces resentment. When you consistently choose yourself while bracing for disappointment, you are less likely to feel trapped or used. Resentment often grows not from what others ask of you, but from what you repeatedly deny yourself to keep others satisfied. By allowing disappointment, you prevent that slow accumulation of anger and fatigue. As this mindset settles in, you start choosing alignment over approval. Decisions become less reactive and more intentional. You no longer measure your actions solely by how others feel about them. You measure them by whether they respect your capacity, values, and well-being. Learning to tolerate disappointment without abandoning yourself strengthens your sense of integrity and allows relationships to exist without requiring you to disappear within them. When you tell yourself that you are responsible for your behavior, not other people's emotions, you are reclaiming emotional clarity. Many people grow up in environments where they were subtly or directly made responsible for how others felt. If someone was upset, it was assumed you caused it. If someone was angry, it became your job to fix it. Over time, this creates a pattern of hypervigilance where you constantly monitor tone, mood, and reactions, adjusting yourself to keep emotional peace. This belief quietly teaches you that your role in relationships is to regulate everyone else. Daily reminders of this truth help untangle responsibility from empathy. You can care about how someone feels without taking ownership of it. Emotions belong to the person experiencing them, shaped by their history, expectations, and interpretations. When you take responsibility for emotions that are not yours, you blur boundaries and lose a sense of where you end and someone else begins. This often leads to guilt, confusion, and emotional exhaustion. This distinction becomes especially important during conflict. When someone reacts strongly to a boundary, a truth, or a decision you made, it is easy to assume you did something wrong simply because they feel bad. Reminding yourself that you are accountable for your actions, not their reactions, allows you to reflect without collapsing. You can ask whether you acted with honesty and respect without letting someone else's distress automatically invalidate your choice. This mindset also protects you from emotional manipulation. Some people, intentionally or not, use their feelings to control others. They may express excessive hurt, anger, or disappointment to pressure you into compliance. If you believe you are responsible for their emotions, you are more likely to give in to relieve that discomfort. When you remind yourself daily that emotions are not directives, you gain the ability to pause instead of react. You respond thoughtfully rather than reflexively. Understanding this boundary also improves communication. You can express yourself more clearly when you are not preoccupied with managing how it will land. This does not mean being careless or harsh. It means being honest while allowing others the dignity of their own emotional process. Healthy relationships involve two people managing their own internal states while staying connected, not one person carrying both. Over time, this belief reduces chronic anxiety. You stop scanning for emotional threats and start trusting that you can handle outcomes without controlling them. You recognize that someone else's discomfort does not automatically mean danger or failure. This creates more spaciousness in interactions and less pressure to perform. As this becomes integrated, you experience greater emotional autonomy. You act from your values rather than fear of reaction. You can be compassionate without being consumed, present without being responsible, and engaged without being entangled. Telling yourself that you are responsible for your behavior, not other people's emotions, creates healthier dynamics where accountability and boundaries coexist, allowing you to remain grounded even when emotions around you run high. When you practice telling yourself these truths every day, something quiet but profound begins to shift. You stop living from reaction and start living from intention. You no longer organize your life around keeping everyone comfortable at the expense of your own well being. Instead, you develop an internal steadiness that does not require constant reassurance or approval from the outside world. These reminders are not about becoming detached, cold, or unfeeling. They are about becoming anchored in self respect, clarity, and emotional responsibility. When your worth is no longer negotiable, boundaries no longer feel like punishments, no does not require defense, disappointment becomes tolerable, and other people's emotions stop dictating your behavior. You begin to recognize yourself as someone who can be kind without being compliant and compassionate without being consumed. Over time, this daily self dialogue reshapes your relationships. You naturally move away from dynamics that demand self abandonment and toward connections that honor mutual respect. You listen more closely to your internal signals, trust your instincts, and make choices that align with who you are rather than who you are trying to please. The external world may not always approve, but your internal world becomes calmer and more coherent. Ultimately, these 9 things are not affirmations meant to bypass reality. They are psychological anchors that keep you grounded in it. When repeated consistently, they build the kind of inner authority that does not need to be announced or proven. You show up more fully, speak more honestly, and protect your peace without apology. And that is not just personal growth, that is emotional maturity in practice.